And mama, some bad talk going around town saying that Papa had 3 outside children and another wife. And that ain't right.
Good afternoon and welcome back for the Government Overview Plenary Session.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Williams. I'm one of the co-chairs this afternoon. The other chair is Masaru Yoshitake, and together we'll be taking you through until 3:30. It's certainly a pleasure to introduce our first speaker. When I read her resume, she's a very distinguished individual. It's certainly an honor to have her here, and also a fine human being. Sunita Satyapal is the program manager for the Department of Energy's Fuel Cell Technologies program within the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. And she is responsible for the program's overall strategy and execution, and including oversight and coordination of approximately $100 million in research per annum. She has 20 years of experience in industry, academia, and government. She worked formerly for UTC. Earlier in her career, Dr. Satyapal was a visiting assistant professor at Vassar College and a visiting scientist at Hokkaido University in Japan. She has co-authored or authored numerous publications, including those in Scientific American, and has 10 patents when she was at UTC. She received her PhD from Columbia, and she did postdoctoral work at Cornell. It's a great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Satyapal.
Thank you, Mark. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Shannon, Sam, the chairs of the conference, the committee, and really all the stakeholders for their support over the last several years, including the Trade Association, the Fuel Cell Hydrogen Energy Association, Fuel Cells 2000, and all of the long-timers in support of fuel cells. So I'd like to give you a quick overview of the DOE program, including the budget, most recent progress, and future plans. And I think most people are familiar with the program. We have a number of teams, and we have cover hydrogen production, delivery, storage, as well as fuel cells, of course. And then we have cross-cutting teams covering manufacturing R&D, safety codes and standards, education, systems analysis. Technology validation is a critical part of our program, and a relatively new activity that we call market transformation to really help bridge the gap between R&D and widespread commercialization. And we have about 400 projects that we're currently funding in the program across a number of companies, national labs, and universities. And we did very recently update our strategic plan, the program plan, which is available on our website. We had that open for public comment and received a lot of comment and input from stakeholders during the last year. So my first message is that there's been significant progress, as you know, in hydrogen and fuel cells, and that progress is being recognized from within the Department of Energy. And so we have a number of statements here. Several more can be seen from our website by the Secretary of Energy. And so, for example, we announced new awards recently, $7 million for cost analysis, and our secretary said these projects will help advance our fuel cell and hydrogen storage research efforts and bring down the cost of producing and manufacturing next-generation fuel cells. These technologies are part of a broad portfolio that will create new American jobs, reduce carbon pollution, and increase our competitiveness in today's global clean energy economy. And we've had other announcements as well by our secretary. We had a project announced with Department of Defense, and you'll hear more about that later this week, for backup power, fuel cells for backup power. And our secretary stated that projects like these fuel cell systems will help reduce fossil fuel use and improve energy reliability at military installations across the country. A very successful event there, and very recently we had an event at Portland Community College with an education flavor where our secretary announced that the benefits of a combined heat and power fuel cell system coupled with the educational benefits of a living laboratory not only advance clean energy technology but help ensure that our nation remains competitive in the workforce of tomorrow. So I think it's important. There's still this perception that his statements from more than 2.5 years ago, we hear about the comments, are still true, and I think it's important to recognize and take a look at what's been happening on the DOE website and the positive statements that have been coming out of the department. Also, in terms of the budget, I think we all realize that this is a difficult time in terms of fiscally, in terms of government budgets, and we do have $100 million, which is really a significant amount of funding for this program. This shows you all the different areas, fuel cells, R&D, as well as hydrogen fuel, production, delivery, and storage. You can see the overall request, the amount in FY11, fiscal year 11, was $98 million. Our request for 2012 was about $100 million, and you can see the House marks and the Senate mark as well. But essentially, it's approximately $100 million, so that's still significant, and it's clear that hydrogen and fuel cells are part of the Department of Energy's portfolio. And you can see the pie chart here that includes, this is really the EERE, Energy Efficiency Renewable Energy Applied R&D budget. There's typically on the order of about $35 million for basic science activities as well. And we have through the Office of Fossil Energy, and you'll hear later on this afternoon about the SECA program, which I won't be covering. But I'd like to give you just a quick flavor of progress in each of these areas. And as you know, every year we assess the status of various technologies and sort of a stake in the sand of where are we in terms of cost reduction, performance, durability, and so forth. And so for 2011, based again on all the improvements that many of you have made in your companies, reducing the platinum loading, improving the power density, and so forth, if we can project to high volume, the cost of fuel cells, automotive fuel cells, would be roughly $50, $49 per kilowatt, compared to our target of $30 a kilowatt. And you can see significant progress, more than 30% in the last couple of years, more than 80% since 2002. So I think that's increasingly being recognized. Of course, that's at high volume, 500,000 units per year, and so you can see the low volume numbers as well, a couple $100 per kilowatt, but still I think the main takeaway is that there's been significant progress in reducing fuel cell cost. Now moving on to examples of hydrogen production and delivery. Here too, our goal long term is $2 to $4 per GGE or per kilogram, and we're looking at multiple pathways depending on assumptions and so forth. You can see the cost coming down again significantly. And then we've spent just DOE funds, $140 million, validating more than 150 vehicles, 24 hydrogen stations. We've traveled more than 3 million miles. You can see a lot of the results here, durability at 2,500 hours or 75,000 miles, and that's with 10% degradation, so it's not as if it's complete failure. In terms of buses, we've been working with DOT, major advantages compared to diesel and CNG buses. And then in hydrogen storage, we've shown more than 250-mile range, one vehicle independently validated at more than up to 430-mile range on one fill, and a lot of materials developments for long-term low-pressure storage. But high-pressure tanks are here now and will enable market commercialization. And then there's a lot of activity behind the scenes with safety codes and standards as well that I'd like to highlight. Testing, life cycle testing of tanks, more than 50,000 units. We've developed safety courses. Education is a key part of the activity, and educated more than 17,000 first responders and code officials through introductory web-based courses and advanced hands-on training. So I think analysis as well is a critical part of the program. And to give you some idea of some of the non-transportation activities, we had Oak Ridge National Lab conduct a study for us a few years ago looking at various applications, backup power, forklifts, CHP, and so forth. And the retail price, since cost is sensitive, from various companies, and then developed a model to project what that price would be in the industry for these applications. And then several years later, we had them go back and validate. This is with global companies. Many of companies are here today, and I'd like to thank them for their input. And these are average results. We have no attribution to specific companies. And then you can see where we are today. In every single case, we either validated the model or the cost is even lower than we thought it would be for each of those applications. So here also, I think we really want to emphasize cost reduction, continued cost reduction in progress. Now, one other example of an analysis activity. Very recently, we announced a request for information, and we would request feedback by December 16th. And this looks at the total life cycle cost analysis of different vehicles. And the perception sometimes is that fuel cell vehicles are much more expensive than the other vehicles. And so we had good coordination across all the relevant programs within Department of Energy to highlight fuel cell vehicles along with all the other possible powertrains, including biofuels and so forth. And what's key is we have a sensitivity analysis that looks at different assumptions for the cost of fuel in the future. This is a future projection, as well as different levels of technology success. So for instance, battery cost or fuel cell cost. And so we request specific feedback on the assumptions, high, moderate, or conservative assumptions, as well as how do we project the cost reduction for certain technologies where we don't have a learning curve yet. And then finally, we also request feedback on the general financial analysis approach that we used for this total cents per mile analysis. So we appreciate your feedback. And then we all know that infrastructure cost is key. It's a key challenge for hydrogen and fuel cells. But we've looked at a number of external studies as well. And this shows you that if you look at a cost per mile basis, a number of the external studies indicate that infrastructure costs for fuel cell electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles are really not that different. So in the order of 3 to 4 cents per mile, depending on the assumptions for fuel cell vehicles. And then for BEVs, if you have each individual consumer have to pay for a charger, for instance, if that can be up to $2,000, that also adds up on a cost per mile basis. And so I think with hydrogen infrastructure, the key is that the upfront cost is really high for initially building the station. All our slides will be on our website as well, so you can see details from all the various studies. But again, a main takeaway is that the infrastructure costs are not necessarily that different. However, as I said, the upfront costs for hydrogen infrastructure are a challenge. And so we've been holding workshops, for instance. We had one just recently looking at the natural gas industry and potential synergies, looking at R&D needs, regulatory, environmental barriers, as well as innovative approaches. And here the idea was to bring in the natural gas industry and see what more can we do to accelerate the use of both natural gas as well as hydrogen. So we could think of LNG for heavy-duty trucks. There's a lot of interest, both in the government as well as industry, in exploring the use of the increasingly available natural gas. And one example of that in terms of synergy, and all of this will be available on our website, we just finished the workshop last week, And one example is a tri-generation or combined heat, hydrogen, and power that we've heard of before, I'm sure in this audience, where you can use natural gas and produce electricity and power with a high temperature fuel cell and then co-produce hydrogen where there's demand for hydrogen. And so we did announce earlier this year a major press release. This was on the main DOE website, the entire government website, on applauding the world's first fuel cell and hydrogen energy station in Orange County, a project that we co-funded with other state entities, with Air Products and Fuel Cell Energy, and I think it was a very successful demonstration, and we're still hoping to get some good data from the project. But essentially the project used waste biogas from a wastewater treatment plant in a high temperature fuel cell that could co-produce basically some hydrogen here from the anode, and you can use the hydrogen for fueling vehicles. We'll have 250 kilowatts of power, 100 kilograms per day of hydrogen, and I think it's going to be really critical to see if by co-producing the heat and the electricity, can we get the cost of hydrogen down? So I'd like to thank all of the partners there. And so fuel cells, as we know, can be used for prime power, but we're also investigating its use for backup power. So a quick update on our primarily Recovery Act projects, but as well as some interagency agreement deployments. We're now up to about 900 kilowatts deployed, about 200 sites in terms of backup power. You can see all the success there. I think the investment tax credit as well as the grants in lieu of tax credit has been very helpful there. And another area where it's been helpful is with forklifts. And I would also like to highlight that NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, will be presenting, and we have presentations as well from within the DOE program throughout this week, covering the Recovery Act projects as well as the data and the results from some of these activities. And now as an example with fuel cells, I think it's really critical since government funding is very tight to show what limited deployments we have can really help spur the industry. And here's one example where we had a relatively small number of fuel cell forklifts that we deployed through the Recovery Act. And now as a result, we have more than 3,000, and we're still tracking this, additional fuel cell lift trucks with no DOE funding. You can see a lot of the companies here, Coca-Cola, Wegmans, FedEx, and so forth. Fuel Cells 2000 just published the business case for fuel cells. You'll hear about that later. And we're quantifying the benefits, emissions reductions, and I think it's really, really important for the industry and the end users as well, not just the developers, to quantify and really publicize the benefits. So here's an example, I think, very recent news tracking what's the benefit of a limited amount of funding, and then obviously we would be able to off-ramp our funding and then use that on higher priority projects. So I think in terms of the federal policies for fuel cells, the grants in lieu of tax credits has been very successful. Of course, that's expiring now. The investment tax credit goes till 2016. There was a lot of confusion on the alternative fuel infrastructure tax credit, which was $200,000, and it's now the same as the other alternative fuels. And so there's a correction that needs to be made on one of the federal websites. So it's not on our website, but I think as of last week, I think we have more clarification that this specific tax credit expires in 2014, but it is $30,000 and not what it was, which was $200,000. That part has expired, but we really have not seen industry take as much advantage of that tax credit. But in terms of the 1603, this gives you an idea of some of the entities taking advantage of that for fuel cells, and we're up to roughly 27 million. But I'd like to emphasize that if you look at how much has been spent so far, we've just counted more than $8.5, almost $9 billion. And this, as you know, is either 30% or $3,000 a kilowatt grants, in other words, cash, in lieu of the tax credit. So I think that's a very successful program. However, we really would like to see fuel cells take more advantage of the program and remind everybody that it's really expiring very soon. And so we'd like to get more units, more systems into the ground. Now, when it comes to federal deployments, there's not as much incentive. We don't get the tax credit, but we've been working with DoD, for instance. You'll hear presentations later in this week on the backup power projects, deploying across military installations across the country. And then we've also published a interagency action plan with 10 federal agencies. We had a high-level meeting to see what more can the government do, both in terms of R&D as well as really accelerating deployment, really helping to kind of raise the tide so all the ships can go up in terms of the industry. So that will be coming out very shortly. And then we developed, Oak Ridge is here, and we have a procurement guide. We have some extra copies at the bottom of down by the podium over there. So feel free to take a look at the procurement guide. This will help federal agencies to decide when does it make sense to deploy fuel cells. We'll be doing more webinars and so forth to publicize the efforts. And I think publicity is really critical. We've been focusing a lot on what is the benefit of DOE funding. We've been tracking the number of patents as a result of our funding to see what really has been valuable. We're up to more than 310 patents, 30 commercial technologies, and more than 60 emerging technologies. You can see some of the company names here, and we have a report that's also available on our website that we just released a couple of weeks ago. And it's actually a very exciting time for fuel cells. If you look at patents in general, how many people have heard of the US Clean Energy Patent Growth Index? You can raise your hands. So yeah, not too many people have heard of it. And I comment often to my fellow program managers in solar, wind, and other areas that fuel cell patents are up to 1,000 in just the last year. And that really shows the significant investment and potential, the promise that companies hold for the fuel cell industry. So I think communication is really critical. I've told the story many times before, and this is a true story, where I was talking to a high-level executive, not from the government, but about fuel cells and the work that we were doing, and he thought that I was working at NIH because he thought fuel cells were the same as stem cells. And so I think education is really critical. And so we've really been trying our best in the last several months. We have about 70 publications, including blogs, website, press releases, webinars. We had a Motor Week segment, which should be airing shortly. A lot of activities, science publications. I think we really need to ramp up the education activities. And I would like to announce remind everyone of the hydrogen student design contest. You can see a lot of the stakeholders here who've been sponsoring the contest. We've extended the deadline to November 16th, so hopefully a lot of the students here can submit an abstract, come up with ideas, innovative ideas for designing a combined heat, hydrogen, and power system. And then finally, I'd like to emphasize that small businesses are a very important part of the administration and the portfolio. And we have small business SBIR funding. We have a new opportunity which will be posted very shortly, if not today. We've had previous SBIR topics in the science area, and we have the applied topics, which will include fuel cell technologies and hydrogen topics that will be released basically this week, supposedly today. And the actual funding opportunity announcement will be posted on November 28th, and applications are due January 19th. So I think that will be a good opportunity and will include a couple of topics on hydrogen and fuel cells. So finally, I would like to just thank all of the stakeholders. We work with many partners across the country as well as our international partners. And I would like to just, basically thank everyone and recognize all of you for the progress and support. Thank you.
If you can hold your questions until after all of our speakers, we'll have a short Q&A following that. Okay, our next speaker, Dr. Shailesh Vora. He's Technology Manager for the National Energy Technology Laboratory, U.S. Department of Energy. He provides programmatic and technical leadership for the Solid State Energy Conversion Alliance, SECA, and NETL Strategic Center for Coal, Office of Coal and Power R&D. With respect to fuel cell-based generation. Prior to joining DOE in 2010, he was manager of the fuel cell technology at Siemens. Shailesh received his MS and PhD in materials science and engineering from the University of Florida and an MBA from the University of Pittsburgh. Join me in welcoming Shailesh Vora.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to present to you the status of the SECA program, Solid State Energy Conversion Alliance, the acronym SECA. SECA is the program that's funded by the Office of Fossil Energy. What Sunita presented was EE&RE program of the DOE. What I'm going to present to you is the fossil energies program on fuel cells that primarily funds solid oxide fuel cell research for large-scale stationary applications as well as central power. The SECA program has been in existence for over 10 years now, and nominally the budgets have been in the $50 million per year range. Let's look at the structure of the SECA program. SECA program is a consortium between the government, industries, and national labs, as well as universities, small companies, and so on. It's a unique structure whereby the industrial partners develop their own proprietary technology. All of them are focused on commercializing solid oxide fuel cell-based systems. So the industrial teams develop their own proprietary technology. The core teams, or the teams that comprise the universities, national labs, and small companies, what they do is they develop technologies that are cross-cutting to all industrial teams, either one or all industrial teams. The small companies are in it for vendor development and getting it on the ground floor with the industries for their components. The role of the government is to set direction for the program, conduct project management, as well as work with both the core and the industry teams in identifying future projects. So that's how the SECA is structured. And here are our industry teams. We have mainly, primarily 3 industry teams. The first industry team is Rolls-Royce, that's based in Ohio. The second team is the UTC Delphi team, where Delphi provides cells and stacks, and UTC, with its phosphoric acid fuel cell experience, is the systems integrator. So they put together the system, or stacks of which are developed by Delphi. And FCE Versa is likewise a team of Versa Power Systems that's based in Calgary, those people make the fuel cell stacks as well as cells, and FCE, with his molten carbonate fuel cell experience, is the systems integrator, which then puts these systems together. So these are the 3 industrial teams. And here's where the core teams are located. This is geographical distribution of about 30 or so core projects. We have a bunch of national labs, a lot of universities and small companies. For completeness, we have also showed SBIR projects, which are small business innovation research. And these are small companies that are trying to develop components for solid oxide fuel cells. So about 30 projects spread all over the country in core projects. That was the geographical distribution. Here is how the projects are divided within technologies. We have, and as you can see, and I don't have a pointer, as you can see on my right and your left, the three industrial teams, we have a large program in cathode, because for solid oxide fuel cells, cathode dictate a significant portion of the performance as well as degradation. So we have a bunch of universities working on improving the cathode, mainly power density and reliability. We have also programs into interconnects and seals. These are the two main components of a planar solid oxide fuel cell, which more or less dictate the reliability of a planar solid oxide fuel cell. And then we have programs into anodes and coal contaminants. We have a few programs in modeling and simulation, and also some innovative concepts. And these are the concepts for the next generation solid oxide fuel cells. For the sake of completeness, as I told you before, we have also included SBIR projects that also span over various technologies. So that the main takeaway from this is we have core projects that are focused on a variety of areas. Here's the mission of the SEEKR program. The SEEKR program, as I mentioned before, is focused on large-scale power generation as well as central power. We are also focused on coal as fuel. So the SEEKR, in a nutshell, the mission of the SEEKR program is to develop highly efficient solid oxide fuel cell systems that run on domestic coal as fuel. So these systems, what we call IGFC, integrated gasifier fuel cell systems, are what we are focused on. Recognizing that solid oxide fuel cells are modular and they are fuel flexible, meaning they can use a variety of fuels. SEEKR supports distributed generation, large-scale distribution. We are not talking about 5, 10 kilowatt type systems. We are talking about multi-hundred to small-scale megawatt systems that are solid oxide fuel cell based, that are for distributed generation. So that would be a starting point for SEEKR-based systems before they move into coal-based power generation. In fact, the roadmap of all of our three partners, all of our three industrial partners, call for distributed power generation in the multi-hundred to single-digit megawatt scale as the market entry point. So once again, SEEKR is coal-based power generation, but in the interim, in the near term, to establish reliability, to get entry into the market, to get accepted by the customer, SEEKR supports large-scale distributed generation based on solid oxide fuel cells. And this is how we visualize a solid oxide fuel cell into this IGFC type system. What we are showing here is a system concept of a generic integrated gasifier fuel cell plant. On your left, what you see is a gasifier and a gas cleaning system. So the syngas that is produced by the gasifier is then fed as a fuel to the fuel cell system, which is in the center, and that's where we are focused on. And the air comes from an air blower. This is an atmospheric IGFC system. And so the byproduct, you basically separate the fuel and air streams, and the fuel stream, which primarily has CO2, CO, and H2O, is then oxycombusted to get complete CO2 plus H2O, and then you can separate the water out, and what you're left with is CO2. So fuel cells here are used as not only a power source, but also a carbon sequestration component. So atmospheric systems are projected to be nearly 50% efficient. If you have a pressurized system, if you have a better gasifier, if you had higher methane content in your syngas, we project the net electrical efficiency to be as high as 60%. So that's in fullness of time what SECA is focused on. But as I mentioned before, in the near term, we are focused on large-scale distributed power generation. Let's look at the highlights of some of our industrial teams and some of the national labs or the main core teams over the last year. The target for FY11 was to test a 25 kilowatt stack that met the cost and reliability targets. The cost target in high volume was $700 per kilowatt, and the operating hours for the reliability was to run a system for 1,500 hours at less than 2% per 1,000 hours degradation. So one of our teams met these goals by testing it for over 2,000 hours actually, and the rate of voltage degradation was less than 1% per 1,000 hours, and it met the cost target in high volume. Looking at individual teams, here is a high-level summary of what Fuel Cell Energy Versa Power team has done in the last year. And you will hear in detail, so I'm not trying to steal the thunder of the FCE Versa team, just giving you a very high-level summary of what they have done. You will hear their individual presentations in the next 2 days. So at a high level, what the Fuel Cell Versa team has done is they have tried to improve their power density over a wide range and tried also to improve the reliability of their fuel cells. And that's what these bullets show. They have also tested a 25 kilowatt stack that met the cost and reliability target, and thereby they achieved the FY11 matrix. The picture shows their 96 cell stack, which is nominally 20 to 25 kilowatt. Here is the UTC Power Delphi team, and their primary objective in the last year was to increase their cell size from a nominally 100 centimeters square to nominally 400 centimeters square, also to improve their power density, and also to fabricate a 50 kilowatt test stand. So they have done that. They are also working on developing low-cost, high-volume manufacturing processes, which basically results in cost reduction. And Delphi UTC team also worked on a concept for atmospheric IGFC system, and they project 57% efficiency on an HHV basis. And as I mentioned before, when these systems are pressurized, you can see net electrical efficiency is north of 60%. Rolls-Royce is our third team, and theirs is not exactly a planar cell like the UTC Delphi team and the UTC Delphi team and the FC Versa team. The Rolls-Royce cell is integrated planar, segmented in series type of cell. So what they have is they put multiple cells on a single substrate. They combine these cells into strips, and then the strips are combined into bundles. They are put into a pressure vessel. Rolls-Royce's is a pressurized system, and then they integrate a gas turbine with their system. And what is shown in the center is their 1 megawatt system for distributed power generation. Rolls-Royce has also worked on improving their power densities. They have shown an improvement in power density of over 70% since the start of the program. They have shown reliability, which is less than 0.5% per 1,000 hours degradation, which is lower the degradation, better the reliability. And they are getting ready to test a nominally 25 kilowatt system in their test stands in Canton, Ohio. PNNL is a significant core technology partner, and they're working on a variety of activities, including glass seals, cathodes, anodes, contact material, ceramic interconnects. What's shown here is their coating approach to ferritic stainless steel interconnects. Normally, if you use the ferritic stainless steel at SOFC temperatures, there is an issue of chromium vaporization and thereby lowering the conductivity of the steels and increasing degradation. What PNNL has done is coated these metallic interconnect with a spinel material and shown significant improvement in lowering the resistance and hence improving the durability of the interconnects. And this now needs to be shown on a full cell and a stack level. Oak Ridge is also working on a variety of projects. Here what I'm showing is their mechanical property characterization. That's their forte. And they are primarily working on characterizing glass seals, different features of glass seals like porosity, second phase fraction, as well as glass transition temperatures. We are working on trying to improve the power density through cathode infiltration, trying to infiltrate cathode with highly active materials. This in turn increases the amount of triple phase boundaries in the cathode and hence improves power. And what we are trying to do is do some fundamental studies and based on various hypotheses trying to come up with different infiltrant materials and different ways to infiltrate these cathodes, and then test these cathodes at various universities to see if the power density is indeed improved and it's stable. And so we have a group of 6 to 8 universities that are looking at trying to improve the cathode. Finally, this is the roadmap for the SECA over the next umpteen years. On the y-axis is dollars per kilowatt, which is the cost, and on the x-axis is the time horizon. For the last 10 years or so, we were focused on cost reduction. And now that we have reached cost targets in high volume, we are now focused in the 2011, 12, 13 timeframe on trying to improve the reliability, make some prototype demonstrations, also try to establish manufacturing in infrastructure. And what you will see in the next 2 or 3 years is multi-hundred to as high as 1 megawatt distributed power generations that are systems that are running on fuels besides coal, for example, natural gas, and just trying to improve or just trying to establish the reliability of these systems. And in the 2020 timeframe and beyond, we would transition into coal applications. Here's the contact information. We have a website, we have a brochure, and that's my contact information, phone number and email if you need any further information. Thank you very much. Oh, no questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bharat. The next presenter is Professor John Irvine. He is a professor in organic chemistry at St. Andrews University. He has a high profile in fuel cell and hydrogen research with a team of over 30 researchers in this area. He was chairman of the 2010 European SOFC Forum in Jerusalem and is chairman of the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me a chance to present on the UK fuel cell program. something a little bit different to what you've seen before. Budgets are less, but timescales are longer, and that's not all bad. My co-authors, Nigel Brandon is actually manages the SOFC Supergen, Alan Atkinson, Tony Kucernak from Imperial, Keith Scott from Newcastle, Dan Brett from University College London, and Shanwen Tao from Strathclyde University. Now, the UK fuel cell project, 2009 to 13, a 4-year program involving Cambridge as well as people we've mentioned before. Phase 1 was 2005 to 2009, so it's an 8-year program so far, and we're hoping to continue leading it through a merged hydrogen and fuel cell hub. The question marks are because we've applied for the funding and we don't know if we're going to get the money, but the intention is to bring together hydrogen production, storage, and fuel cell supergens. And the structure is a little bit different. This time, what's going to be funded is a core project with the cherries being the grand challenges. So these are the orange are the basic research projects. And this core ongoing project will link into other research projects, government, industry-supported projects, local agency-supported projects, and industry-supported projects. So there's a new design. Our industry partners who are supporting Ceres Power are interested in metal-supported combined heat and power, kilowatt-size systems. Rolls-Royce, who are in Ohio and in Derby in England, are interested in 1 megawatt SOFC systems. On the polymer side, Johnson Matthey make membrane electrode assemblies, and they're very much interested in perhaps using more platinum, perhaps at lower density, but they're very keen to use more platinum in more cells. And Intelligent Energy, another polymer fuel cell company, and this is one of the Olympic taxis that will be in London in 2012. First work package is looking at new measurement methods and really extending length scales from the triple phase boundary up to the stack. And Dan Bratt and Nigel Brandon are the lead researchers in that activity. So things like tomography. This is looking at a Syria-based SOFC cathode, LSCF. And the key thing here is that they've been able to do tomography up to 700 degrees centigrade, so looking at the microstructure under operational conditions. Building on that, Nigel Brandon's looking at reconstruction using a fib analysis, so slicing up a ceramatac anode here and reconstructing that and producing not just pretty pictures, but then going to link that to experiment. So you have impedance spectra of an anode here, and they've linked that, be able to extract the impedances of 3 polarization phenomena at high frequency, medium frequency, and low frequency. Compare those with temperature, and they get the development of these with temperature. And then from that, they can work out things like the exchange current length per unit triple phase boundary. So rather than taking a model system which has got a grid or an artificial grid, this is taking a real system and measuring the triple phase boundary length in the real system. And then taking their modeling behavior modeling a bit further, this is calculating the performance of an electrode, this time a nickel electrode. And you'll see as the overpotential increases, their calculations say that the active thickness decreases. So from 15 at small to 18 microns at small overpotential or small current, as you increase current, the reaction actually becomes more dominant closer to the electrolyte. Then in the same package, looking at polymer electrolyte cells, and a key thing is to transfer ideas between technology platforms. It's something that we often miss in fuel cell activity. So this is using a floating piston to apply pressure in situ, and so you can look at pressure as a function, or performance as a function of pressure. And this is looking, first of all, at the gas diffusion layers, and irreversible compression breaks up some of the carbon fibers, and you can see that there's an irreversibility. That's the displacement as you pressurize and come back, and it doesn't come back to where you started. And similarly, the impedance, or the electrical resistance, doesn't follow the same path. So under high pressure, you're losing connectivity through the gas diffusion layer. And then if you repeat the cycles, you can see that there's a loss in that polymer PEM system as you cycle through different pressures. We've heard a lot from the DOE so far. This time it's design of experiments, not Department of Energy. And this is modeling, trying to look at how efficiency can be improved by system. And so Dan's been looking at various design of experiments. Here he's looking at trading off the electrode area, the electrolyte area, and the system efficiency. As you increase the area, you lose efficiency, even though you would get more performance. Work package 2, Alan Atkinson is leading this on mechanical behavior of fuel cell structures. And in this work, he's looking at the orientation of pores as you sinter. And the two UK SOFC companies that we look at both look at constrained sintering of electrolytes. So it's quite important when you're sintering on a dense substrate that you align the pores, that the pore alignment and pore growth is well studied. So these are in situ studies of sintering. Work package 3, Anthony Concernac is looking at studying durability in PEM fuel cells. Two new designs that he's got. One is split fuel cell for studying corrosion. So you have on the electrode you have hydrogen on one side and oxygen on the other. So this is on the anode. So you're allowing an artificial leakage or a high utilization, so that it's not dynamic. So you can actually study where that oxidation is likely to occur. The other design is a wall jet for studying electrocatalysis. So he's built this wall jet system where you send the gas up and then it comes onto a wall. And just to elaborate on those two, the wall jet system is using a platinum electrode, and what he's trying to do is actually replace the rotating disc electrode. You can see here the performance of the rotating disc electrode is very low current. With the wall jet system, you can get significantly higher current, and he's now trying to get that up to a similar level that you would have in a real system using perchloric acid at the same loading. With the split fuel cell system, he's looking at carbon oxidation and looking at how much CO2 is produced as you change the gas flows. And this relates to shutdown and startup. And the other part that we're looking at is going on is looking at the impact of sulfur on SOFC anodes. And this is looking at, in Imperial, looking at GDC nickel anodes. You see that sulfur, even at 1 ppm, they're finding aging. And they're actually doing Raman spectroscopy in situ to study the sulfur aging. And that should have been under work package 4. His work at St Andrews. One thing is looking at diffusion, concentration, utilization. Even though these losses are quite small, they are losses, so we don't really want to lose efficiency or lose fuel. When we go to methane, natural gas, or even coal gas, these losses will increase. And we're very much developing supported electrolytes, anode supported electrolytes, or even inert supported electrolytes, as in the Rolls-Royce integrated planar cell. And what we've been doing here is, rather than using the anode as a diffusion layer, we've been putting an artificial diffusion layer so that the anode is underneath a porous zirconia and looking at the performance. So this separates the diffusion layer and the active layer, and it gives a better correlation between microstructure and diffusion. So we can know the exact thickness of the layer. And you see that in fuel cell tests, you have diffusion limitations due to the substrate. And a lot of the time that would be ignored. If you didn't go down to 10 millihertz, you wouldn't see this. So it's quite an important phenomenon, which is not always involved in. And if you're thinking about electrical characteristics in a system, this is now sort of 10 seconds response time. So quite important for power circuits as well. Then an area that we're doing a lot of work in St Andrews on, and this is in collaboration with Ray Gorty and John Vos at the University of Pennsylvania, and this is linked into the SuperGen project. And this is where you tape cast an electrolyte and two porous supports. You impregnate the electrode and you form the electrode in situ. Now we've moved to putting in an oxide anodes into here, lanthanum, strontium, chrome, manganese oxide. And key thing here is you see nothing. Centered at 1300 in air, it just looks like zirconia. And again, at 700 in hydrogen, it doesn't appear to be any electrode there. You have a very fine coating of the oxide on top of the zirconia. Now, the interesting thing is when you reduce it under fuel cell conditions, you produce nanoscale materials. And you're producing nanoscale materials in situ under operational conditions. And we think if you're going to optimize performance and durability, you need to have nanomaterials that are stable under operational conditions. When you reoxidize, those nanoparticles go back to a smooth coating. And it's a tension between the manganese dissolution into the zirconia that forms these nanoparticles. So we think it's an important approach, and we're exploring that further with Ray Gorty. Another example we've looked at more recently is manganese-doped lanthanum strontium titanate. And this gives you a similar microstructure of electrode with this lanthanum titanate. You wouldn't see that if there wasn't the manganese present. And that gives reasonable performance, 400 at fairly high temperature. This is slightly more durable. It'll last for weeks without any issues in a fairly simple system, or for a week. Going on, we developed a rig for measuring in situ in a small sort of 1 foot by 6 inch pressure vessel. We're looking at symmetrical cell testing under say 5 bar of oxygen. And you see, as you might expect, that the performance improves as you reduce pressure. We're looking at how that will affect durability. And finally, we not only do work on polymer fuel cells and solid oxides, we're also in an add-on project looking at bridging the gap, looking at new concepts between 200 and 500 degrees centigrade. And one of the examples is this silicon phosphate that we found to show quite interesting properties. And Stefan Saxon has got that on his presentation. But getting towards 200, the conductivity is still 0.01 Siemens per centimeter, which is where you'd like. And then Shanman Tao has developed this composite between phosphoric acid and boron phosphate. You can see it's a nanostructured composite with the boron phosphate and an amorphous layer where the phosphoric acid is on top of that. And this fits into perhaps into phosphoric acid type designs at the moment. And within the capability that he has in the lab, the system is durable. Probably could benefit from larger scale industrial testing, but for 200 hours at 250, 200 degrees centigrade, he gets stable performance, and there's no evidence of degradation. And I was given 17 minutes. Hopefully that's about 17. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Owen. The next presenter is Dr. Matthias Rask. He has 10 years professional experience in the R&D department of Global Automotive Supplier, DANA. He holds the position of research manager at Project Management URIC since 2010, in charge of projects in the fields of fuel cell and hydrogen. He has a PhD from Free University Berlin in the field of chemistry. So please start.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and the opportunity to present German's R&D activities in the area of fuel cell technology. The content of my presentation is broken down into 4 chapters. First, I would like to introduce the project management agency. Then I would like to give you a survey about the energy policy regarding fuel cell technology. Then I will present some statistics about R&D funding, and then I will start summarizing. Our project management agency manages the funding on behalf of 4 federal ministries and various ministries of the states. The numbers given are related to our full R&D spectrum. It's not only fuel cell technology. And last year, we managed a volume of more than 1 billion euros. In case of fuel cell technology, the competences are segmented between 2 ministries. The Federal Ministry of Economics is in charge of the R&D, and the Federal Ministry of Transport, Building and Urban Development is in charge of the demonstration projects. We are a neutral partner and independent, have no economic interests, and we are nearly 600 employees at 3 sites. After the short introduction, I would like to give you a survey about the programs in Germany. On top, there's a national energy concept published last year and showing a vision until 2050 for preventing climate change. To become reality, there's a lot of energy research necessary, and the energy research program comprises the measures for all kinds of energy technologies to meet the targets. The existence of the National Innovation Program proves how important fuel cell technology is seen in Germany. This is a program alone, only for fuel cell technology with an own budget over a period of 10 years. And the National Development Plan is a technological base for the NIP. And in detail, it contains all details, and the latest version will be published next year. Besides, I forgot, the Energy Research Program, the 6th, became operative quite recently in September of this year. Yes, the national energy concept is very remarkable. It contains measurable targets. The CO2 emissions and the energy consumption are to be decreased, reduced, and the share of renewables will increase. And for us here, the most important question is, what will be the share of fuel cells to reach these targets? Because numbers are not so imposing, the next slide visualizes the energy scenario. The x-axis represents the time scale, and the left y-axis is the energy consumption, and the right y-axis is the GDP. The 50s, 60s, when energy consumption and GDP grew simultaneously. This time is called in Germany the years of economic miracle. If we are lucky or if we succeed, then we will become witnesses of the years of an ecological miracle. The GDP is to increase in future as it did in the past, whereas the energy consumption will fall sharply. That is a huge challenge. And fuel cell technology is seen as an important factor to cope with this challenge. In the morning session already, Mr. Bonhoff told a lot about the National Innovation Program. I don't want to repeat. I just want to emphasize that two pillars bear this National Innovation Program, the pillar of basic research and the pillar of demonstration. And there's a great interaction between those both pillars. R&D is not just the phase before demonstration anymore, but the findings of the demonstration projects feed new R&D projects and make the new R&D projects more target-oriented. Besides, within the NIP, we distinguish between 6 applications: transportation, hydrogen production by electrolysis, energy supply for households, industrial applications, special early markets, and overlapping non-specific developments. Besides energy research program and national innovation program, there is quite a lot of other funding on support of the fuel cell technology. We have the institutional funding of universities and energy research centers to create the scientific basis. Then the numbers regarding energy research program and national innovation program are related only to the governmental share. You have to add the share of the private companies too. And very recently, in summer this year, the Energy and Climate Fund was opened. And this fund will be fed by CO2 certificates and taxes on nuclear fuel elements. Then we have special calls with deadlines to accelerate certain developments. And furthermore, there is funding by the 16 German states. And not to underestimate, we have the European funding program by joint undertaking. And yes, but this 460 million euros are not for Germany alone. So on the next 3 slides, I would like to present you some statistics about the R&D funding in the past. And the considered period is that one from 1st January of 2006, because that was a time when the 5th energy research program became operative. In this time, 159 projects were funded with a total governmental funding share of 149 million euros. That means an average 1 million euro per project. And the average share of funding is 52%. Of course, universities can get up to 100%, and the maximum limit for companies is 50%. What I would like to express is this evaluation is thus the fact that the funding was spread quite evenly over the 6 areas of application during this period. Nevertheless, right now, I would say there is a focus on vehicles, energy supply for households, leisure, and backup systems. The chosen classification in the next statistics survey is size or type of enterprise respectively. We distinguish here between large enterprises, small and medium enterprises, and institutes, whereby large enterprise is just everyone that isn't small and medium-sized anymore. It must not be a global player. And yes, you will recognize at the first glance that the distribution of colors is not so evenly. The large enterprises dominate. So it must be taken into consideration that very often subcontractors are involved in the project of the larger companies, and the effective funding is smaller than it seems to be. And you shouldn't gain the impression that small and medium-sized companies are not important. The outstanding examples for the driving influence, especially in the early markets. And institutes, of course, are necessary to provide the scientific support for the joint projects. The classification chosen for the last statistical survey is the type of fuel cell. You see all type of fuel cells are supported. No one is excluded. So not surprisingly, PEM and SOFC plays a main role. And as it seems, development of high temperature fuel cells is more expensive than the development of low temperature ones. So many developments are very closely to the marketability. We cannot observe any big market penetration yet. We expect that it will change within the next 5 years, and the fuel cells will start to become experienced reality. According to this list, special expectations we have towards the automotive applications, because this is a mass market, and as a consequence, the components, the prices for the components could fall, and all the other applications could benefit. However, a larger market entry is foreseen only for the second half of this century, of this decade, excuse me, of this decade. For higher market penetration, we see 5 main challenges. The biggest challenge is to design fuel cells functionally to costs. There's a big interaction between item number 1 and number 2. The increase of efficiency is related to the Ruhe system, and finally to the total CO2 balance. The nature doesn't reflect where the CO2 comes from, and our core goal, as I mentioned in the beginning, is to reduce CO2 emissions. The H2 infrastructure is built up step by step. Nevertheless, right now there is no intact H2 infrastructure, and reformers are widely used to deal with diesel, natural gas, and so on. And in this case, even smallest traces of released sulfur can damage the cells. And I think that is a very good example for target-oriented basic research. The final conclusion is fuel cell technology is seen as an essential brick for preventing climate change. The support is ongoing or getting even stronger. We see a lot of various applications, from niches to mass markets. Niches are seen as door opener, and mass markets as multiplier. We support or fund mostly joint SLIM projects, and we see a trend towards multinational projects, and I think that is good to see, because the tasks in front of us are enormously. Yes, that's all already. Thank you for your attention.
We now have about 5 or 10 minutes for a Q&A session. If you have questions for our government plenary speakers, please go to the microphones in the aisles and identify yourself. Okay, we have one.
Hello, I have a question for the last speaker. It was interesting to note that there was no large stationary programs, fuel cell programs. Can you comment about the focus on portable and stationary, small stationary?
According to the R&D focus, there is no special program for stationary fuel cells. We have everybody can apply for funding. That is, but it's right. Right now there is a lack in industrial applications, in stationary fuel cells for higher power. That one reason is that yes, MCFC fuel cell development has frozen more or less right now, and yes, that lack has to be filled again with probably with yes, new SFC projects. There is one underway that is supported by the NOW right now, the so-called SOFC20 project, but that is some weakness point. That's right.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
To Sunita, on one of your slides, you showed the, I think it was the education and the market transformation programs were zeroed out, although it looked like there were some progress being made on the Senate side. What's your thought on this? Do these programs get zeroed out, and do they get dropped? Do they get moved into other areas? What's your thought on how to move some of the education work that you've been doing forward? Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Joel. And definitely, I think, especially because we've been prioritizing, and we had $42 million under the Recovery Act. That was why we were able to reduce some of the emphasis on market transformation. We also had $15 million in 2010 market transformation, and we really haven't spent all of that yet. So given the budget constraints, we moved some of that into market transformation and safety codes and standards. So even in spite of the budget constraint, we kept safety codes and standards at about $7 million. And so we see a lot of the education activities under that key activity, as well as market transformation and Recovery Act projects. So we still see that as very critical. But I also think that education in general, there's an interest across DOE, and we need to leverage some of those activities. And rather than just have fuel cells and hydrogen education within our program, tap into a lot of those resources and get our fuel cell education activities into those efforts as well.
Yes. Itmubong, Kettering University, Flint, Michigan. My question is for the SOFC experts. Why don't we use, or why don't we talk about or make plans for stationary SOFC to bottom cycles, especially at refineries, to use CO or the unburnt natural gas to operate the SOFC plants?
Let me repeat your question. Is your question, instead of coal, why can't you use natural gas? Is that the question?
I mean, bottoming cycles in refineries where gases are released into the atmosphere. One way is to separate the gases and use the CO in operating stationary SOFC.
Yeah, that's fine as long as there is an SOFC available and as long as there is a company that is willing to provide the SOFC to do that kind of an application. DOE has no issues with that. DOE tries to develop the fuel cells, and since SOFCs are fuel flexible, they can be used for a variety of applications. And so we do encourage spin-off applications, and if the application that you suggested is of interest to any of our industrial teams, we would not stand in the way.
Okay, thank you.
This question belongs somewhere, and the best audience is the plenary session. One of the failures of my career was my inability to convince the electric utilities and the gas utilities to adopt fuel cells. It just seems to me I just came back from Connecticut where 1 million people without power, and my children are dispersed throughout the Northeast trying to find places to live since power will be out for 1 to 2 weeks. It just seems to me that the electric utilities take a lot of grief when the power goes down due to trees falling, etc., that would be a logical market for us in fuel cells, where the utility would own the power plant, dispersed units, and offer to the customers the cost of premium power and put it into the rate base. But for about 25 years, I was unable to convince the utilities to do that, either because the fuel cell cost was too high or because they felt it was a threat to their wires business. But I've been trying to sell fuel cells on onesies, twosies bases for a long, long time. And I think the electric and the gas utilities are our logical customers. I just don't know how to make that sale close. And I offer that thought to you all.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
It also brings me back to a thought I had. I was going to ask DOE, was the metric of cost per kilowatt the appropriate one? I mean, should we not be looking about cost per kilowatt hour or cents per mile? Now the technology is so much closer, and Bloom Electron in California shows you that they're undercutting electricity supplies, so they're actually cutting out the gas utilities from what I can see. And there's a lot of units in California. And if I was in California and I could get my electricity cheaper than the grid, I would be wanting to buy a Bloom Electron system. It's a cent less per kilowatt hour than you get from the grid, I believe. And they're guaranteeing that for 10 years.
Thanks, John. And I agree. And I don't know if there are any utilities in the audience, if we can have some discussion. And I also agree that the cost was really high. There were installation issues and so forth. Availability was low in terms of the systems. But I think now is where the timing might actually be more appropriate with all the interest in natural gas and low prices with natural gas. And we have been talking about targets in terms of cents per mile or LCOE. So we have both a technology type targets like dollars per kilowatt, capital cost targets, durability, performance, and so forth. And then we're also really starting to wrap our arms around the total life cycle cost. And that was the reason, for instance, for the RFI and to show all of the technologies on an apples-to-apples comparison, whether it's solar, wind, or battery electric vehicles. And get that total cost assessment. So I agree with that. But again, I think in terms of stationary fuel cells, depending on the spark spread in specific regions where natural gas prices are low and electricity prices are high, that's where it makes most sense.
Christian Lorenz from E.ON, a German utility. In Germany, we have a large spark spread, so it maybe makes more sense to operate decentralized energy systems there compared to the USA. but still the prices are too high, unfortunately, today. But you shouldn't only compare the costs per kilowatt hour or per kilowatt with today's energy costs, I think, but you should think ahead and compare the costs of the future energy system, because the world will change. Renewable power will become more important and will maybe increase the cost of, let's say, baseload energy. So if you compare just the cost of fuel cell power today with today's power costs in the world, that's maybe a little bit unfair. But what I wanted to ask is the DOE. You talked about the CECA goals of clean coal power by CCS. I mean, CCS is very nice, and if you can separate the CO2, it's even nicer. But what are your plans concerning CO2 storage? Do you have a plan, a solution for the USA?
Yeah, we have a group working on carbon sequestration. It's beyond the scope of this presentation and beyond my qualifications to talk about CO2 sequestration at this point. But we have a large program in CO2 sequestration within DOE.
I guess I'll just add that it is a really important part of the portfolio within DOE. So even if we're talking about electric vehicles, PHEVs, BEVs, even fuel cells, when we talk about hydrogen production, and so there has been increasing emphasis on CCS within DOE.
Yeah, go ahead.
Shinichi Hirano, Ford Motor Company. I think government support for the R&D is very encouragement and very good. But let me ask about the international partnership or coordination for the individual government support for the hydrogen and the fuel cell area. I think that, for instance, today we see a UK project. So I think how those outcomes, research outcomes, to be available for the research and the development activities in this country. So maybe a question for Sanita or DOE.
Thanks, Shinichi. And I think most people are aware of IPHE, which was a high-level government international partnership with 17 countries and the European Commission. And that was launched in 2003. We have an upcoming meeting, in fact, in November in Berlin. And that was a mechanism for really a top-down investment and commitment specifically to hydrogen and fuel cells. And we also have, through the IEA, International Energy Agency, hydrogen implementing agreement and advanced fuel cells implementing agreement, more than 25 countries, hundreds of projects where governments have really committed to supporting their researchers. It's more a bottom-up, really technical sharing of projects. So those are two examples of more formal international commitments and agreements, and then there are a number of bilateral agreements as well among countries. So I think in specific areas like safety codes and standards, harmonization, even education, sharing information, and really educating at the top level government officials on the status and the potential for hydrogen and fuel cells has been progressing. And I think it'll be important in the next couple of years, especially to reinforce that support and to show, for industry, really to show all the progress just in the last few years.
It just strikes me that I raised some work we're doing with Ray Gorty, and I should acknowledge ONR, who actually supported the joint project with a small grant. It was very successful, and whilst this work is a follow-on from that, ONR are the prime sponsors of this meeting, so I should certainly acknowledge that type of support.
Okay, doesn't look like there are any more questions. I want to remind you to that there is a reception, a break, a sweet treat break in the foyer behind you, and that the technical sessions begin on the 5th level at 3 o'clock, and that there is an exhibition in the exhibition hall tonight from 5 to 7. There's an industry reception sponsored by Toyota, Connecticut Clean Energy and Finance Investment Authority, and the USC Columbia Fuel Cell Challenge. Let's thank our speakers. Final time here.
Please proceed to the floor.
Also, if Mr. Yajisi from the International Center for Hydrogen Energy Technologies, Istanbul, Turkey, Mr. Yajisi could come to the podium. Thank you.
Please proceed to the foyer for the sweet treat break sponsored by Tanaka. Your technical sessions will begin at 3 p.m. on level 5.